All right, let's get back to it after a while. Um, so I'm going to talk about abortion again, since recently, I mean, not very recently, about a month ago, I had a discussion on another channel on abortion. I had the pro life position, and there were also pro choice and a pro death position. And there were some topics that came up that I didn't go into much details during that, and I want to basically explain it a little bit in more details in this video. I'm not going to provide much context on it. I will link to the original video. You can watch it. You can see the whole thing. But there's only one part that I want to get into it, because I guess that's like the most critical one. So, as I mentioned in my video on abortion, I believe that if we try to separate the concept of personhood from a human being, in other words, do not give the status of a person to a human being from the moment of conception, it will either be arbitrary, or it will lead to some internal inconsistencies or some absurd results. And one of those cases that we were investigating during that interview or discussion was when someone goes into a reversible coma or even sleep. Do they lose the personhood that they had? Because it seems that the pro-choice and pro-death position was working based on sentience and based on the interest arising from that sentience. And it seemed that when someone goes into a coma, then they do not have that sentience, so they should not count as a person. But of course, the reply was that because that person did have some interest before going into that coma, they still remain a person. And I could sense a kind of begging the question happening during that discussion, which I want to make more clear right now. All right, so let's say that we have a person, let's call it Bob, and Bob gets into an accident or falls ill or whatever and loses his consciousness or sentience. And let's call him now Bill, right? So Bob falls ill and becomes Bill. And first notice that I'm not using the same term for these two situations, because I cannot refer to them as the same name, because Bob and Bill are different. Because if I assume that they are the same person, then I'm implicitly assuming that Bill is also a person. And I believe that's what happened during that discussion, or is happening at least in the mind of pro-choice and pro-death when they do make that sort of argument. I'm just trying to show why that argument does not work if we do not assume that they are the same person, which obviously we can't. All right, so we have Bob, and then Bob goes into an accident, goes into a reversible coma, and becomes Bill. So the question is Bill a person or not? So if someone has this idea that sentient is necessary for being a person, then obviously the answer is no, because Bill is not sentient. Bill is by definition never had a moment of consciousness, because Bill by definition is that period in which Bob is not conscious, right? So in that sense, if we just say that sentient is necessary, then Bill will not be a person. But of course, that's not the response. The response was in the discussion, if you watch it, that there was some interest before going into that coma. Therefore, Bill is a person. But that does not make any sense to me, because what we are basically saying is that Bill is a person because Bob had some interest. And if you think about it, that doesn't make any sense, because why would the interest of Bob have any effect on the personhood of Bill? Now, I understand that there are other things behind that argument, but I'm just trying to show that just prima facie, the fact that Bob is a person and has interest does not mean that Bill has an interest or is a person. So why would someone think that because Bob has interest, therefore Bill is a person? Well, of course, this comes from the fact that we say, okay, even though we are not referring to them as the same person, but nonetheless they share the exact same body, right? So Bill's body is exactly the same as Bob's body. They have the same brain, right? They have the same memories. They have the same everything that was the same for Bob is exactly the same body for Bill. But that still doesn't answer the question why Bill is a person. Because note that even if you say that, okay, the reason that Bill is a person is because he has the same body as Bob, what we're saying is that Bill becomes a person by just having this sort of physical information in his brain, even though he's never aware of those things, even though he has never become conscious of those information. So how can we even define an interest? How can Bill gain any interest in some information implanted in his brain, which he was never aware of them, and he will never be aware of them because by definition Bill is not sentient. So you see, so that's a problem, because even if you bring in the physical continuity between Bob and Bill, it still does not arise to an interest for Bill. Because if that happens, what we're basically saying is that if you have someone who's not sentient, we can remove or add personhood just by removing and adding these informations. I'm not going to even talk about the fact that brain is not like a box that you can put information in it. That interest requires a kind of active sentient participation to bring up memories, to connect. And so it's not like just a box, but even if we assume it's something like that you just put informations and all the memories and all the ambitions in that box, if you're not aware of them, then how does that even arise to any kind of interest? You see, Bill is not sentient. So what difference does it make whether there are some information in his brain or not? Because he will never be aware of those information because he's not sentient. So that's why I'm saying that if someone thinks that, okay, because Bob has interest and is sentient, therefore Bill has interest, is because they're implicitly assuming that they are the same person, right? But by doing that, they're already assuming that Bill is a person, begging the question that we were discussing. Now, someone might claim here that the whole thing of Bob and Bill is just metaphysically a very dubious assumption that I'm making here. Because if I say, okay, it's Bob and then it's Bill and then it's Bob, what's going on here? Like, what happens to Bob when there is Bill? And what happens to Bill when, again, we have Bob? And is it even the same person, that Bob before the accident and the Bob after the accident? But that cannot be an objection to this problem, because if we make that objection, the same thing can be used for abortion, because when Bob goes in and becomes basically Bill, Bob goes out, Bill comes in, the same thing happens when Bob is a fetus, right? Now let's call the fetus version of Bill, let's call it Phil, right? So Phil, we have Phil in a fetus position, right? Non-sentient, non-person, and then we have Bob. Again, the same questions can be asked. It's still metaphysically dubious to assume that we have Phil, and then Phil goes out of the picture. What happens to him? We don't know. And then we have Bob. Where does Bob is coming from? We don't know, but they share the exact same body. Of course, that's problematic, and that's actually an argument against abortion. It's, by Alexander Proust, I Was Once a Fetus paper. So that cannot be an objection. And if we allow for these kind of changes, that you have a human being which is not a person, and then you have another human being which is exactly the same physically but is a person, then we should also allow for this thing, that you have a Bob who's a person, but then you have Bill who's not conscious, is in a reversible coma, but is not a person. And we cannot explain really why is it that Bill is a person. We can't say Bill is a person because Bob is a person. That doesn't make any sense. Why would the personhood of Bob transfer to the personhood of Bill? And if you want to defend that and say because of this physical continuity, then still that doesn't rise to any kind of interest in Bill. Bill is not sentient, so he's not going to be aware of any information that is contained in his physics. So how does that even rise to any kind of interest? So, and if not having a sentient and not having enough sentient to be aware of the information of your brain, basically an interest, if none of these are necessary for having a sentient, then what is a personhood? You see. Yeah, I guess that's just the point that I wanted to make regarding this example, which shows again that if we separate the concept of personhood from the total life of human being, starting from conception to death, it's either arbitrary or it leads to these kind of absurd results, inconsistencies that we can't see. So yeah, I guess that was about it. And you should check out the whole conversation. I will put the link in the description. Thank you.